Welcome back to a very special episode of state-sponsored conspiracy podcast, the only conspiracy podcast that's officially sponsored by the U.S. government.
It's our 1000th episode anniversary. Woo!
Not only that, but this is going to be, like, when I say a very special episode, I mean that in the original sense, like how sitcoms would do very special episodes, and it would be about AIDS or something.
Oh, not in like the clip show sense where it's actually not a special episode. It's just an episode where they were going through a writer's strike or something.
No, I don't mean that at all. Now, to explain, I'm going to take us back several weeks ago. Weeks ago.
Was that the time travel noise?
That was me having something stuck in my throat. And it has been pointed out to me that with this microphone, it constantly sounds like I need to cough. And I am going to fix that. We are getting a new microphone from like the NSA. But several weeks ago, I was rewatching The Boondocks, as I do every now and then. And I hadn't seen it in a few years. First of all, I realized that Aaron McGruder is definitely a conspiracy man. And when I first watched it, when I was like in high school, I didn't realize that the final episode of the show that he actually worked on is just a direct metaphor for 9/11 being an inside job. Have you seen that episode?
Probably, yeah.
And I think it is like the only show that I'm aware of to directly say 9/11 was an inside job. Aaron McGruder, the creator, has also called Condoleezza Rice a war criminal in person, which you have to respect on some level.
I mean, who hasn't, though?
Well, no, I'm sure loads of people have gone on Twitter and called people war criminals. But this guy did it in person at like some White House event.
I broke into her house and did it.
I think even the most diehard neocon has to respect that sort of boldness, you know? But basically, by watching The Boondocks, I realized that there's a whole world of conspiracies that we haven't tapped into yet. And that is the world of black conspiracies.
I feel like we did that last episode, though.
No, this is new. We're starting a whole new series.
But what about Oprah and Tupac and the League of Extraordinary Black Gentlemen and all that?
Okay, true. We did touch on this before. And we also talked about the CIA started AIDS thing, which is also sort of a black conspiracy, although it's really a Russian conspiracy, but we've been over this. My point is, we are starting a new series on black conspiracies. And so I thought it was time to reveal to our listeners that you, all along, have been half black.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, not unfortunately, but like, unfortunately, we had to deceive you. This whole time, you probably thought we were both white, or at least
yes.
Asian, which is a form of white.
And this is not a bit, to be clear.
I do technically have rights to say the N-word. I choose not to, out of respect for Dr. King and Obama.
And I know our audience is blown away by this right now. And in order to get us and our audience through this experience, I'm going to be reading a famous poem from the acclaimed black poet Wol Soyinka, titled Telephone Conversation. Perhaps some of you have heard of it before. Pay attention. Don't laugh. This is serious. I want you all to really think about this poem. The price seemed reasonable, location indifferent. The landlady swore she lived off premises. Nothing remained but self-confession. Madam, I warned, I hate a wasted journey. I am African. Silence. Silenced transmission of pressurized good breeding. Voice when it came. Lipstick coated, long, gold-rolled cigarette holder piped. Caught I was foully. How dark? I had not misheard. Are you light or very dark? Button B, button A, stench of rancid breath of public hide and speak. Red booth, red pillar box. red double-tiered omnibus squelching tar. It was real. Shamed by ill-mannered silence, surrender pushed dumbfoundment to beg simplification. Considerate she was, varying the emphasis. Are you dark or very light? Revelation came. You mean like plain or milk chocolate? Her accent was clinical, crushing in its light impersonality. Rapidly, wavelength adjusted, I chose West African sepia, and, as afterthought, down in my passport. Silence for spectroscopic flight of fancy, till truthfulness changed her accent. Hard on the mouthpiece. What's that? Conceding, don't know what that is. Like brunette. That's dark, isn't it? Not altogether. Facially I am brunette, but madam, you should see the rest of me. Palm of my hand, soles of my feet, are a peroxide blonde. Friction, caused foolishly, madame, by sitting down, has turned my bottom raven black. One moment, madame, sensing her receiver rearing on the thunderclap about my ears. Madame, I pleaded, wouldn't you rather see for yourself? Now, why am I reading this poem? I'm reading this poem because our listeners are that landlady. They are hearing you and they're thinking, what does this guy look like? How black is this guy? And they're having to confront their own racial prejudices.
I guess I would say I'm West African sepia.
I want all of you listeners to think about this and to think about the poem and to watch the Boondocks and then come back. And then maybe you'll be ready for this powerful series on black conspiracies.
The poem sucked.
First of all, how dare you? Second of all, the first conspiracy we're going to talk about is the theory that Bush blew up the levees during Hurricane Katrina. Have you heard of this before?
Kanye West told me it was true.
And to start this off, I'm going to play a interview from Bill Maher, where Spike Lee brings up this conspiracy.
And this past Saturday, Louis Farrakhan did a kind of a reunion of the Million Man March. I don't think we got 1 million people this time. But he was saying last Saturday in Washington that he thinks that the federal government, there was a conspiracy to actually blow up those levees so that they would flood the poor black districts in New Orleans. I have to tell you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe it. But when you see some of the things that have gone on in this country...
Now, first, I'm going to stop it right there. Because what's funny about this immediately is Bill Maher is now a conspiracy theorist. This interview was 17 years ago. Now, Bill Maher is like a crazy person who doesn't like want you to go see a doctor.
Thought he was like a liberal guy.
He is, but he's also like he's become like sort of a hippie as well, who's like
an anti-vax hippie?
Not quite an anti-vax hippie, but like an anti like doctor sort of hippie.
It's like an anti-vax hippie, and I guess that's kind of what like black people are.
Is Bill Maher the blackest person in this interview?
He did talk. Remember when? You remember when he said the N-word? He was talking to that like senator.
I did enjoy that. So now this is what Spike Lee's opening remarks are. This is the important part.
Exactly. It's not far-fetched. And also, I like to say, it's not necessarily blow it up, but the residents of that ward, they believe that there was a Hurricane Betsy in '65. They felt the same thing happen, where a choice had to be made. One neighborhood, we got to save one neighborhood and flood another neighborhood. Look, if we're in L.A.
No, that's been done before.
If we're in L.A., and there's an emergency situation, we call from Beverly Hills, we call from Compton. Which one are the cops coming to first?
Right. But that's different than proactively blowing up a levee.
So Hurricane Betsy and previous hurricanes, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But basically he's drawing parallels to previous incidents to throw back at Bill Maher. But I'll continue.
To flood one neighborhood. I'm not saying it's not possible.
But that would require a conspiracy. I mean, look, we can all understand. Anybody with any knowledge of history can understand why a lot of people feel this way, that that's a reasonable theory. But it would also require a conspiracy at 3 levels of government, that would the local, the state, and the federal. It would require no white
Presidents have been assassinated. So why is that so far-fetched?
I'm going to pause this again. The woman who's talking right now, I don't know who she is. She's not Spike Lee or Bill Maher.
I believe that is Wendy Williams.
Incorrect.
All right, it was the best educated guess I had.
Now on this, I do actually agree with Spike Lee, because she is saying she's basically saying the government couldn't pull something like this off. The government could not pull off putting some C4 on some levees, which I don't buy that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would just involve just like the CIA. That involves that's like a 10-man team of the CIA.
Yeah, we know people personally who could easily achieve this.
You don't have to involve any other state levels. You don't have to involve the state or the city or even the federal. Just a word from the big man to the CIA. It gets done.
Exactly. Biden picks up the phone and makes this happen. That's all you need. I tend not to like arguments where people say, oh, this would be too hard, too many people would have to know, it would be too logistically difficult. I feel like this is never really the way to come at a conspiracy. Because, I mean, the government has pulled off all sorts of shenanigans, like, provably. So it's not like they're incapable of doing something like this.
The where it breaks down is that if you are saying that there's, like, a bunch of people involved in the conspiracy, then the level of like trust is like impossibly high. Like it's gonna get out. That's why like 9/11 conspiracies are ridiculous, because it's like, okay, so you're implying that like literally like hundreds of people had knowledge that this was gonna happen. It's like, no.
Yeah, there are some things where it starts to become implausible, like how many people would have to know, but I'll continue with this before we go off onto 9/11.
Because it would require no white person in the government to have a moral compass. It would require no black person to have a spine. And I think that that's a very hard case to make.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that election in 2000 was fair? You don't think that was rigged?
It's not a question of being fair. It's
you don't think that was rigged? If they could rig an election, they could do anything.
Now, does this sound familiar or what?
Yeah, history repeats itself every 4 years.
Yeah, but I mean, that election may actually have been somewhat rigged.
Who was Bush against?
Gore.
The guy who invented the internet?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
People, the internet wasn't as popular back then, so it's kind of like, you know.
How do you
people
think?
Didn't care
what do you think our society would be like if we had Al Gore as our forever president, like JFK? You know how they wanted to make JFK the president forever, and then he got shot. What if we had Al Gore till today?
I don't know. I mean, I think people like to say that we'd be living in like a magical fantasy land right now, like that documentary. I can't remember what it's called, but there's this documentary about the 2000 election.
Oh, Any Given Sunday.
At the end, they're like, and if Gore had won, all of our problems would have been solved.
Probably.
And I don't know about that, but probably would have been better.
What do you think it would be if Trump won last time?
I think things would be somewhat worse.
We'll find out.
We will. Yeah, I guess it is sort of nice to know that you can have a ton of people saying the election is rigged, and then people will eventually forget about it. That's kind of nice. Like, you pretty much never hear about this anymore.
Yeah, I only know about Al Gore as like a meme guy. He's a meme man. Global warming internet man.
Anyway,
maybe we're just too young. Maybe the older people listening to this are gonna be pissed, yelling at us.
No, people aren't going to email us and say, I still constantly talk about Al Gore.
Gore has a chance in the upcoming election.
Let's listen to what the rest of Spike Lee has to say.
I was in New Orleans right after the hurricane in the Ninth Ward. And while I didn't hear anybody say the levee was blown up by the federal government, I did interview a bunch of people who were stuck there who said they believed this was part of a conspiracy to rid New Orleans of black people. They honestly believed that. I didn't argue with them.
Right.
I just listened to what they said, and I felt bad for them. So as you sit here, who is someone who is rich and has options, and are watched by people who are poor and have no options, it seems to me it's your responsibility, your obligation to tell them the truth. And you know the truth, which is the federal government did not blow up those levees. So don't feed the paranoia and the craziness.
How is that feeding the paranoia?
Because you're saying it's entirely possible when you know perfectly well it's not entirely possible.
Now that is the voice, in case any of you didn't recognize it, that is the voice of Tucker Carlson, who is urging people not to fan the flames of conspiracies and paranoia.
What is going on?
Yeah, so Tucker Carlson and Bill Maher have both basically grown into full-fledged conspiracy theorists since this interview 17 years ago.
Oh yeah, Tucker Carlson had that guy on who said he had gay sex with Barack Obama in a limousine.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Maher and Tucker Carlson, I mean, not that they're exactly the same level of crazy, but since this era, have both gone completely off the rails.
Everyone knows Obama has gay sex in helicopters, not limos.
I would say of the people at this table, Spike Lee now seems like the sanest by far. So like Spike Lee is kind of the crazy one at this table in this interview, but I would say he is currently the sanest of the three.
What about Wendy Williams?
Wendy Williams, is she? I think she still has a daytime talk show, which I don't know what's going on her show. She could be interviewing like, you know, QAnon people for all I know.
She has a weekly segment featuring Alex Jones.
The all-female studio audience just applauds, like, yay.
Welcome back, Alex.
Tucker Carlson also, in this interview, is wearing a yellow bow tie, which is the universal sign that you're trying to be like some sort of intellectual libertarian dude.
No, he's back then he was known as Tucker X.
He's the white Malcolm X.
Yeah, he was part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
I would like to see a Tucker Carlson who goes down that route. That would be more interesting than his current shtick. Anyway, now this is the response.
The federal government blew up the levees. A, there's zero evidence. B, it's difficult to blow up a levee. C, there were news cameras all around. Nobody saw it. I mean, let's be real here.
Because nobody saw it.
Because
nobody saw it means it couldn't have happened?
It's okay. I could say.
Let me ask a question.
Okay.
With the history of this country, you ever heard of the Tuskegee experiment?
Look, I'm not going to sit here for your history lesson. I want to know what. Of course, I've heard of the Tuskegee experiment.
Let's explain to the audience what the Tuskegee experiment was.
I'm not even going to get into the history lesson.
I love how the audience like starts applauding when he says Tuskegee experiments. Like that has a very sort of like Eric Andre-esque quality to me. Like, yeah,
Tuskegee, woo,
yeah. Tell him.
Yes.
I just enjoy that. So, I mean, Tucker Carlson, you know, all of his rebuttals there are not, you know, totally sensical. Like, I'm sure there weren't cameras pointing at the levees, but, you know, basically he's saying, you know, is there any sort of evidence for this? And that's a fair question.
Is there?
Well, let's get into that now, because Tucker Carlson has raised a fair point here. I don't think I've ever said that sentence before, but I'll say it now. The supposed evidence for this idea that the levees were bombed is there's like a throwaway line in the Boondocks that sent me down this whole path about this. It's the episode where all their relatives from New Orleans move into their house. In case any of you are wondering. But there are supposed eyewitnesses. Well, not exactly eyewitnesses, more like ear witnesses. There are people who said that they heard explosions. I heard an explosion like as Katrina was happening.
Those were probably just skyquakes.
Those could have been skyquakes. So it's probably the most like notable person who said this, who wasn't just a random man on the street in front of a news camera was Diane French, who is known as Mama D. And she was like a community leader, and she said on record, in front of like a committee, she said, "I was on my front porch. I have witnesses that they bombed the walls of the levee. Mister, I'll never forget it." So she emphatically said that there were explosions. And there are other people who said that they heard explosions. And that's as far as like sort of physical at the time concrete evidence goes. But then most of the argument is really what Spike Lee talked about in that interview, where he says, like, based on previous events and just how black people have been treated, it seems reasonable to assume that they were blown up as part of this plot to get black people out of New Orleans.
So there was no actual evidence that it happened, but Spike Lee proposes that it's just probable. It's more likely to have happened than not, even if nobody witnessed it.
Exactly. And I think this is another instance where really history has repeated itself, because he brings up Tuskegee, and during COVID and all the vax stuff, you heard that same thing, where you heard a lot of sort of anti-vax white people saying, well, black people are justified in not getting the vaccine because of the syphilis experiments. So like, black people are off the hook. They don't have to get the vax because the government actually did experiment on them in the past. I'm sure you heard a lot of this. And it was interesting to see basically that exact same argument come up again during this whole Katrina discussion. And so if the thing is, if the plan was to get rid of black people, it doesn't really stand up to the actual events of what happened. So first of all, Katrina did not get rid of black people. According to the 2010 census, before Katrina, New Orleans was 67% black. And now New Orleans is about 60% black. And it actually only went down because a lot of Latinos moved in, not because the honkies were taking over New Orleans. So it didn't actually like wash away any of the black people. And it's also worth noting that it wasn't just black areas that got flooded. So one of the worst flooded areas was Lakeview, which was a rich white area of New Orleans. So it's not as though, they somehow were able to bomb the levees so that only the hood was getting washed away. Like, that just didn't really happen.
You think those rich white people were acceptable casualties for the government? I don't think so.
No. Surely the government would never deliberately bomb such a thing. So the sort of like broad argument of like, well, look at what happened, that doesn't really make sense. Now, Maher said this at the very beginning. The person who basically started this was Farrakhan, who was and is the head of the Nation of Islam. And he seems to be like ground zero for this conspiracy theory. He pretty much immediately came out and said they blew up the levees. And then he said this when questioned about this conspiracy. He said, "It is the duty of government to either prove the rumor is false or prove that their suspicions are true and that somebody is not guilty of the mass destruction of billions of dollars worth of property, but that somebody is guilty of mass murder." So he basically comes out right away. Like, during people are in FEMA camps, Farrakhan comes out, immediately says, like, Bush blew up the levees.
Prove me wrong.
Exactly. And he's like, prove that they didn't blow up the levees, which is an incredible like debate tactic. And I like that he did that. Like, imagine if like the 9/11 truther people were just like, prove that it wasn't an inside job.
And usually the response to that is, we saw planes fly into the buildings.
That would be persuasive. He also said I heard from a very reliable source who saw a 25-foot deep crater under the levee breach. It may have been blown up to destroy the black part of town and keep the white part dry.
Where's the crater now?
That's a good question. I don't know who exactly this reliable source he's talking about here is, but he also separately said that the mayor of New Orleans told him that the levees were bombed. And then the mayor of New Orleans had to go to Washington, D.C., basically to go on record about many of the actual issues that followed Katrina and the actual racial problems that ensued that were real and not made up by Farrakhan. And he was asked under oath about supposedly telling Farrakhan that the levees were bombed. And he had to say on record, I did not say that. Farrakhan made that up. I have never said the levees were bombed.
What a liar, dude. Farrakhan would not lie to further his ideals. What the hell?
So it comes down to, do you believe the mayor of New Orleans or Farrakhan?
I feel like we should be asking ourselves that daily. Do you believe Farrakhan? The answer should probably always be no.
Probably, yeah. So that's basically the whole conspiracy. And what's left of the conspiracy is what the other thing Spike Lee brought up, which was comparing it to past hurricanes. So Spike Lee's a little mixed up here. He says that the levees were bombed in Hurricane Betsy, and what I assume he meant was 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood.
We were all there. We all remember that terrible time.
Yeah, only real like 19 teens kids will remember the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. So this was a massive, massive flood, and it was believed to be on track to send so much water to New Orleans that it was going to completely flood the city. And so basically, this was the 1920s. So basically, every major American city is like comically corrupt. So basically, the like bankers who ran New Orleans just got together with the city council, and they're like, "Listen, we can't have New Orleans get flooded. This would be kind of bad for us financially if we were all literally underwater." So what they decided to do was to blow up a levee and basically flood this big area and basically let the pressure out before it could get to New Orleans. And this was not a secret. This was not a conspiracy. This is something they did totally above board. And they basically they told the people who were living in the area that they were going to flood, they told them, listen, we have to flood this area, otherwise New Orleans will get flooded. And we'll help you guys move, and we're gonna like give you like a bunch of money after, and it's gonna be fine. And people were really pissed, as they always are whenever any sort of, eminent domain type things comes up. But eventually, these were all like really poor people, and like a lot of them were black, so they're like, okay, fine, whatever, you win. And so they all moved, and then they blew up that levee, and everything got flooded.
Is this the same flood from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is that the same flood?
I don't remember that movie enough to say.
It's at the end. He gets home and his whole house gets...
I didn't really like that movie. It kind of annoyed me.
Shut up. It was a good movie.
It was like, this wasn't...
You can't not like a Coen Brothers movie. I'm cutting all this out because you're wrong.
You leave this in, editor. This is going to sound like a ridiculous criticism for a movie, but the people who know what I'm talking about will understand. When I watched that movie, I felt annoyed that it wasn't based on a true story.
What?
Like, I watched it and I was like, well, this wasn't even real, so what am I doing here?
It's a period piece.
Some people will understand what I'm talking about. This is also how I felt about the movie Seven. But anyway, what pissed people off even further was that blowing up this levee didn't even end up being necessary. because even higher up the Mississippi, some levees broke just naturally. So the whole thing wasn't even necessary. It was a total disaster. And then furthermore, the people ended up not getting pretty much any money. They never paid out. They basically scammed these people. And the like ye olden FEMA camps that were set up for them were like, they were bad for everyone, but there was definitely like a 2-tier system where they were like, you know, black farmers going to this place, white farmers going to this place. And so it kind of like Katrina, there was like some racial aftermath. But at the time, it was actually like the decision was not really based on racial grounds. Like the area that got flooded was pretty black. New Orleans was pretty black. It was actually kind of a reasonable decision to flood the less populated area rather than flood New Orleans.
Who was their Kanye West at the time to say the president doesn't care about black people?
Some like jazz singer comes on the radio and says Calvin Coolidge doesn't care about black people.
Now Calvin Coolidge doesn't care about black people.
See, that is the sort of voice that if you had done before people knew you were black, they might have thought that wasn't cool. You know what I mean?
Racist voices are always funny.
And well, people did actually kind of say that about Calvin Coolidge, and this is seen as being something that did push some African Americans away from the Republican Party, which was, you know, party of Lincoln, party of freeing the slaves, and this was one of the things that made them think, you know, maybe these Republicans aren't so great after all.
Was the Katrina prototype that caused the party flip?
I think by Katrina, black people were already not the biggest fans of the Republican Party. Maybe that's what happened to you, though. Were you a Republican pre-Katrina, and then you're like, I'm swapping?
I don't vote. I was also a child during Katrina, as were you.
Little kid was like, this isn't right.
You can't say my name.
Oh, little... You're right. I think that's the first time I've ever accidentally said your name. You have to edit that out.
What's our names for this episode?
Yeah, we didn't do code names. You be Kanye and I'll be Coolidge.
Wait, who was the guy standing next to Kanye in that video?
Oh, that's the perfect code name, but I can't remember that guy's name.
It was Michael Myers. Mike Myers.
Michael Myers. Okay, yeah, those are the code names. You're Kanye and I'm Michael Myers.
But I think Michael Myers is the horror movie guy. I think it's just Mike Myers.
Oh yeah, Michael Myers.
No, we'll keep it. You'll be Michael Myers from Halloween.
Anyway, Kanye, I was surprised to learn that, you know, despite the fact that you're really not going to hear too much about the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, this really was a huge event. And it was incredibly expensive, like way more expensive comparatively than Katrina was, like for the government to deal with. And it had a really lasting impact on it had a really lasting impact on the like demographics of the country, because it was a big part of sort of the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the Midwest and moving to places like, you know, Detroit and Chicago, because a lot of these people who got displaced were like, you know what, who knows when this place is not going to be flooded anymore. This place sucks anyway. We're going to move.
Yeah, back then they used to have Fat Tuesdays and Thursdays. After that, just Tuesdays.
And they were like, this is not enough. We've got to go. That's the Great Mississippi Flood. Spike Lee referenced Hurricane Betsy, and I really looked around for like Hurricane Betsy conspiracies, and I really could not find almost anything. I think the idea that Hurricane Betsy was also an inside job is like such a deep black people conspiracy that there's simply not much to be found about it on the internet. The other big pop culture, the other big pop culture reference of Hurricane Betsy is from a song called Georgia ... Bush / Wheezy's Ambitions, in which none other than Lil Wayne blames the honkies for Hurricane Betsy. He has this line. Now, are you ready for my Lil Wayne impression? It's going to be tasteful, and it's going to be dead accurate. I'm not even kidding.
I highly doubt it.
No, that I do not have a Lil Wayne impression. But he rapped this amazing bar. I know some folk that live by the levee that keep on telling me they heard explosions. Same shit happened back in Hurricane Betsy, 1965. I ain't too young to know this. That was President Johnson, but now it's Bush. So he's not too young to know about 1965. He was probably alive back then.
Lil Wayne?
Yeah.
No.
I'm
gonna go ahead and say no. Lil Wayne is not 70 years old.
I found so little about this Hurricane Betsy conspiracy that I think it was really sort of like a pre-internet conspiracy that floated around. And I think it was probably sort of inspired by the 1927 flood, where they really did blow up the levee.
Or the government did a really good job at covering it up.
I think that is possible. But I think sort of 1927 was sort of the inspiration for both of these conspiracies, for Betsy and then for Katrina. I really think that was sort of the blueprint for this. What I realized, like reading about a lot of this Katrina stuff, is that this is really pretty much a dead conspiracy. Like, people pretty much never talk about this. I'm sure if you ask the average person about this, they would not even know this was a conspiracy. Certainly the average white person would not have heard of this. Obviously, I've heard of it because I'm like Paul Walker, where, he says cuz and he knows a lot about the streets. You've known me for a long time, Kanye. Would you agree with that?
You're Paul Walker-esque. I mean, you're really into Japanese drifting. Was that Paul Walker? Was that the same character?
Yes. He was the one in the Supra.
Right, you own a Supra, so
correct.
I mean, you're not wrapped around a telephone pole, but you're like living Paul Walker.
I thank you for backing me up on that. I've
never seen any of the Fast and Furious movies, but he is like Paul Walker.
Thank you. Now the listeners have to believe me now. But basically, what I was sort of thinking about in more general conspiracy terms is that if you don't like a conspiracy, probably the best thing to do is just wait like 3 months to a year, and it will probably just sort of go away. Even conspiracies that were really big at the time, years later, have just sort of died. Like, think about 9/11.
People talk about 9/11 all the time.
They do?
Yes. People are always talking about 9/11 was an inside job. That's like the only conspiracy people talk about. I think people know about 9/11 being a conspiracy, but I don't think, like, especially not young people, like people our age or younger, I do not think that they like actively care about or really know much about like 9/11 truthers. It's not at like the forefront of the discussion at all. Maybe I'm just in a 9/11 bubble.
It could be, and I would like to get in that bubble because that sounds interesting.
I don't want to be in the bubble though.
You want out of the 9/11 bubble?
I don't want to hear about 9/11 all the time.
You're ready to jump out of the building.
Okay, too far.
But my point is, I think conspiracies really have a tendency to like die and not stick around. I think only a handful of conspiracies have like really managed to stay at the forefront for a long time. And I think like the internet is like a graveyard of conspiracies, like this one. Like, this is a totally dead thing. Although at the time it was clearly somewhat popular, especially like in that area. that concludes the black part of this podcast.
That's it? That's all we have?
No, that's not all we have about Katrina, because we're gonna continue from here into like wacky honky territory.
Oh, okay.
So, also during Katrina, a Idaho weatherman named Scott Stevens became convinced that Katrina was created by the Yakuza, who were using a Russian-made electromagnetic generator to create the hurricane as revenge for Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The Yakuza, not just like the Japanese government or something.
No, specifically the Yakuza.
Okay.
And he became so obsessed with this idea that Katrina was a Yakuza revenge project that he ended up getting fired from his job as a weatherman. And basically the news channel he worked for in Idaho, they started looking into his background a little bit too hard, and they realized that he'd lied on his resume and he'd never actually graduated from college. And so he got fired, and he started becoming a full-time conspiracy theorist. And he had his own website where he discussed, weather control. And I was reading, statements from him at the time, and he said, "There's a chess game going on in the sky. It affects each and every one of us. It is the one common thread that binds us all together." Would you agree with that?
That there's a war being fought between different weather machines?
Yes.
I would not agree with that.
I just wanted to check, because sometimes you do go native on me, and you do end up believing the conspiracy.
I believe in like cloud seeding and some maybe low-level weather control, but not the Yakuza being in charge of a hurricane generator, no.
He also, in support of his theory, he said, "The Soviets boasted of their geoengineering capabilities. These impressive accomplishments must be taken at face value, simply because we are observing weather events that simply have never occurred before. Never."
Hurricanes never occurred before?
He's never seen or heard of a hurricane before.
What about global warming? Does that not affect weather?
Well, he also said this: "The evidence of these weapons at work found within the clouds overhead is simply unmistakable. These patterns and odd geometric shapes seen in our skies each and every day are clear and present evidence that our weather has been stolen from us, only to be used by those whose designs for humanity are rarely in alignment with that of the common man."
How do you steal weather?
That's a good question.
Where did it go?
Now, after he was fired for lying on his resume, but really fired because he'd become crazy, he had this to say in his defense: "Meteorologist is a very vague term. And then when you get into television on top of that, it adds another whole mix into it."
Why does it sound like a F tier Batman villain? Like he's gonna team up with Calendar Man or something.
The Weatherman.
Meteor Man.
But I love that he got fired, and then he basically said, "What is a weatherman anyway?"
What even is a meteorologist, folks?
Which, I mean, he's kind of right. Like, what qualifications do you really need to stand in front of a green screen and tell people what the weather's gonna be?
I mean, I think they do like a bulk of their work off camera, doing like actual research and stuff.
Do they really do it though, or is there like some guy looking at radar?
I mean, that's them. They're looking at the radar. That's their job.
No, I'm sure they have some nerd somewhere, or they just get it from like the government. I don't think that like Al. Who's the big weatherman on NBC?
Reverend Al Sharpton.
Al Sharpton. I don't think Al Sharpton is like poring over radar data to try to figure out what the weather's gonna be. I mean, come on.
It's Al Roker.
Al Roker. I don't think he's doing that. I don't think Scott Stevens was even doing that.
Well, yeah, Scott Stevens wasn't, because he didn't know how, because he never went to school for it.
Another great line I saw in an interview with him is he said, after quitting, He said, I wasn't thinking about looking for work, to be honest with you. It's time to gather the thoughts and goals and mind and go on. Which I think that should be sort of an inspirational quote that people hear when they quit their jobs or get fired.
Yeah, I got fired. I'm not worried. I'm chilling.
He's like, I don't even care. What is a weatherman? I don't care. I'm going to make my website and just talk about the Yakuza. And it's fine. And Idaho sucks. And I don't even care what the weather's going to be tomorrow. Like, bring a jacket.
I don't even care. It's not in my control. It's in the government's control. They're fighting a war up there.
I like his attitude. He thought that the names Katrina and Ivan, which was the biggest hurricane before Katrina, he thought they sounded like Russian names. And so they were probably created by a Soviet geoengineering device.
Sure. Because that's what we base the names off of.
Yeah, okay, yes, but also, I mean, he is kind of right. Like, Ivan and Katrina.
We don't base the names of the hurricanes based on the country of origin of the weather device they were generated from.
I bet if he had finished his degree, he would have learned that. Like, he never got to that part of the class where they explain, like,
I don't think you need a degree to know there isn't a secret Russian weather device that is being employed by the Yakuza to kill black people in revenge for Hiroshima.
That is true, because I knew that, and I have never been to weatherman school.
I've never been a Batman villain.
Well, that is the actual end of this episode.
Wait. What about all our good emails?
Let's look at the listener emails.
Bills.
Let's see. Spam, phishing email, NSA, CIA, ignored. Those guys are boring.
We have a bunker.
Actually, I don't think there's really anything that would really be good to read in here, live on air.
I never get to read them. You're hogging them all to yourself.
All right. Next time, especially because we're kind of entering a black era of the podcast. You can read the listener emails next time.
Yeah, February's come early, folks.
And you know what? Don't email us if you're white.
Nigel, keep it to yourself until we're done with our black arc.
Nigel, please respectfully pause your emails. The next episode is going to be deeper and blacker than this one.
Longer and harder.
I hope all our listeners are ready. I hope they're ready to deal with their own prejudices. I hope you're ready to sort of step up and lead the podcast again.
Speaking of racist voices, I feel like Hitler probably had a killer, like, Jewish guy. that he would do for, like, hilarious party jokes. Yeah, it's probably unbeatable.
I would like to see a reunion of Spike Lee, Tucker, and Marr, where they apologize to Spike Lee. And Wendy Williams. They should all go on the Wendy Williams show and apologize to Spike Lee.
And apologize to George Bush.
Until next episode.
Love you.